I knew that New York had a lot of type nerds, but it's pretty good. So I'd like to welcome our panelists and everyone on behalf of Cooper Union. Thanks for coming. I'm Cara Edwardo. I'm one of the co-founders of Type at Cooper and also the program coordinator. So when you email Type at Cooper, that's me. That's who you get. So Cooper Type is a postgraduate certificate program in typeface design, and we're in our second year of existence. And today is the first day of the condensed program, and we have students from 5 continents coming. So welcome, you guys, especially crossed an ocean to be here. So last year we only had 16 participants in the summer. This year we've got 29. And the extended program, last year we graduated with 11. This year looks like we've got 12, which is fantastic. And the Herb Leboun's lecture series, which I know a lot of you have come to before, that's a series that we've been running in conjunction with the program that's really sort of integrated into our curriculum, so very educational. And this July we have 2 more talks lined up. We have Alan Haley coming to do a talk called Type Trends, how cool designers create hot typography. And Eric Van Blockland, I didn't really memorize this, sorry guys, will present a talk on tools, eyes, and ideas. So you can check our website, coopertype.org, and you'll see the details, and you can RSVP through the site. So since we've managed to attract so many type-obsessed people to the East Village for the last 2 years, it's appropriate that Ellen contacted me to propose that we collaborate to do this program here at Cooper. And Cooper-Hewitt Museum and Cooper Union have a long history. In the late 1890s, the museum was actually here at Cooper Union, and on the 4th floor, across the street in the Foundation Building, Peter Cooper's granddaughters were given space to open the museum, and they built a collection of design, collection of stuff. And then the museum closed in 1963, of course, in the usual Cooper Union fashion. It ran out of money and went into a panic, and we do this cyclically. We're doing it right now too. And so it was basically through lots of crazy things. It eventually went into the hands of the Smithsonian, and so in 1968 the Smithsonian took possession of the collections, and then it went up to the Carnegie Mansion. Andrew Carnegie also was a Cooper Union person, donor, philanthropist, and so they've been showcasing exhibitions about design ever since, and we're really excited about that. And also Ellen and I have a long history. We were students at Cooper Union together, and so we're excited to do this. And now I'm going to hand you over to Ellen.
So, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm going to say a few words about the exhibition that we have at Governor's Island. It's called Graphic Design Now in Production, and it's organized by Cooper-Hewitt Museum and Walker Art Center, and that's open all summer on Saturdays, Sundays, and holiday Mondays only. And you can get there by a ferry, which is free, and you just go online and get the ferry schedule. It's really fun. And our panelists tonight, most of them are featured in the exhibition, and they have generously agreed to speak to you tonight about their work. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the format. We are doing Pecha Kucha style, which means that each speaker has 20 slides that automatically play for just 20 seconds. And my slides are also playing automatically, and I've already completely screwed up. So I thought that was only fair because we put these guys under a lot of pressure. So each lecture is only 6 minutes long, which allows us to have 6 amazing presentations tonight, but no one can hog the stage. Except for me maybe, because I'm running out of time. So what I'm going to do is give you a very brief introduction to each of our amazing panelists that will have nothing to do with the names that you see on screen. And then they're just going to come up and do their thing. And they're very brave to agree to this absurd format, but I think you'll really enjoy it, and you'll learn so much so fast about fonts. So Philippe Apeloig is my very good friend and graphic designer working in Paris. He is inspired by the modernist design tradition, using basic elements to create posters, identity systems, and publications that shimmer with complexity. And typography is part of everything he does. It's very exciting. And he taught here at Cooper Union, and he was also director for a time of the Herb Llewellyn Study Center. So it's great to have Philippe back here at Cooper Union. William Berkson is a writer, type designer, and mensch. He is the designer of Williams Caslon Text, which is the latest and greatest digital revival of that legendary typeface. He is also a philosopher of everyday life. His latest book, Pirkei Avot, Timeless Wisdom for Modern Life, was issued by the Jewish Publication Society. And he is director of the Jewish Institute for Youth and Family, where he has developed courses on, quote, becoming a mensch for teens. And I thought you had to wait till you were 18 to be a mensch, so I'm thrilled that you're opening up that position to younger people. Hubert Jocham studied graphic design in Augsburg, Germany, and North England. In 1998, he moved to London and worked for Henrik in corporate branding. Today, he is designing brand marks and typographic systems for an unbelievable list of clients. I could hardly stand it. It's so impressive. I'll just give you a few. Interbrand, the Brand Union, Landor, Future Brand, GQ London, Vogue in Russian, Turkish, and French, L'Officiel Paris, Details and W Magazine in New York, and the list goes on and on. It's very impressive. Henrik Kubel co-founded A2 in London with Scott Williams in 2000 after graduating from Royal College of Art. A2 is an independent design and typography studio with a core philosophy of drawing new type for every project. So he'll be out of business by the end of the year. And his clients include MoMA, Penguin Press NYC, New York Times Book Review, Harvard University Press, V&A Museum, and Aperture Magazine. He's a visiting lecturer at Royal College of Art and a member of the secret Masonist Society, AGI. So we'll hear from him. Jeremy Mickel runs Mickel, a Minneapolis-based type foundry. He has designed typefaces for Village and House Industries. He has taught typeface design at RISD, and he is a graduate thesis advisor at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. His work has been honored by the AIGA, Type Directors Club, and of course by the Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum, Smithsonian Institution. Jesse Ragan learned to create typefaces while at Rhode Island School of Design. And I was curious with your bio that was very specific, while at. You know, that I think you taught yourself, but you were there. But you had some help, some inspiration. He went on to design typefaces at Heffler and Frere Jones, where he had a hand in Gotham, Archer, and many other very amazing type families. And since 2005, he has worked independently in Brooklyn, wherever that is, developing typefaces for a variety of clients. And you can go and buy his fonts in the retail libraries of Font Bureau, House Industries, and Darden Studio. And he teaches right here at Type at Cooper, a program that he helped to found. So that is it for the blurbs. And we're going to invite Philippe to come up and be our first participant.
Okay, good evening. 100 years ago, Malevich did this painting, very famous one, the Black Square, and I think this is probably the first time an artist took interest on pixel before technology exists. And this is one of my main inspiration for my work. And this is, you can see how I did the first approach to typography design to design my own font using a grid and black out some squares, and square after square it gives the birth to type like a sculpture. They are really piece of sculpture for me. They have shape in terms of something very massive, very constructivist. They are not very round. You can see how I develop all the alphabet with the lowercase and capital and numbers. And you can see also they are stencil type. They are not, of course, made for body text, but mostly for title. These are two posters which were designed for a dance and music festival. Music is on the left and dance on the right side. And you can see how I play with typography and how typography are in movement for me. There is really a sense of moving, of creating a kind of frozen motion with type. As I explained it to you, a typeface has to be developed with all the glyphs that we use today, and this is what I'm trying to do for most of the fonts which have been developed in my studio in Paris. We care about all the little detail that type brings to designers. This is another inspiration for me by Muybridge or Jules Marais, a photographer in the 19th century who studies the movement, how they can be, looking at the movement. And for me, they are a great inspiration for design typography to play with type. And for example, you can see on that poster, all those letters were made with slashes after slashes, and they were very much inspired also by the idea of embroidery, how you can use embroidery slashes to design type. Like you can see on this image, that a type can be also animated. Luckily, with the new technology, we can bring motion graphic into typography, and that's something that I like to experiment. Most of the font I'm designing are about experimental typography. And here you can see another poster which was designed for the French Institute here in New York for a festival called Crossing the Line. All the letters are made with a little pixel or some dot and comma or column that they are accumulated next to each other, and that creates shapes. This is a floor plan of a library. I designed typeface for an association of French librarians, and I was inspired by the floor plan where you can see table, computer, chair, etc. And that gives the birth of the global identity for this association. Instead of representing book, you can see that I design the letters by the association of different shapes that reveal the floor plan of the library view from above, desk, chairs, table, etc., etc. And after that, it was possible to play with it to create the logo that you can see on the top, A, B, F, A for association, B for bibliothèque, which means library, F for French. And then it's 100 years, A and S mean years in French, and you can see that the whole alphabet was created based on this very limited number of shapes. And here, years after years, they have a yearly congress, and it gives me the possibility to develop the font. For example, to overlap the shadow, the silhouette of something more massive and black behind, and then those dots and shapes that create the letters on the top of it in white. And a year after, I decided to go for the line, just to use the line of those letters and to create a new series of font based, of course, for that client. And the circle is because they were about economy. This you see the global alphabet from A to Z with all the numbers, again the lowercase and the capital. You see that they are also made like stencil type. They are made by segment, by a little line next to each other. And again, we have the whole alphabet. Just because I don't want to limit myself. Usually when I start a poster, it's a first step to design font, and then the process is to evolve to design everything that's missing. At the beginning, there's only few letters, and then you got the whole alphabet. This is a poster for a scientific review about Africa. And I was very much inspired by the handicraft work of these people who live in South Africa called Nebele. And I wanted to create a movement again, another kind of movement that happened, like a progression. You see the letters on the top, they are complete, and there's a strike, a line in the middle, a white line, that emerge and transform the letters, and it becomes more abstract. This sense of abstraction for me is also very important in typography, and you have to remember the first image of Malevich. This is the last image, as fast as I remember, for Nobel. It's a poster where you can see that all the letters are made of dots with a progression. It's that create like waves, and from letters which are very bold and some which are much lighter. And this is the whole alphabet. There are 6 steps between the very compact group of dots and the most lightened one. On this image, you can see also that most of my work is based on a grid system, and the grid is always there as a structure to make sure that we keep in control with what we do. Voilà.
I have a confession. I'm a writer. Writers want readers to actually read what they write and even believe it. So when I turned to type design, my goal was a typeface that's highly readable, friendly and welcoming, yet also has an aura of authority. My first hero of readability is Theodore Lowe de Vinne. If you want to see how readability matters, just walk 3 blocks from here and you can see the magnificent de Vinne Press building, which I like to think of as the house that readability built. De Vinne, writing in the late 19th century, criticized the Scotch modern, popular in his day, as having too high a contrast, too thin thins. He also said that Thornton's boldface here, that there's not enough white space within the letters or between the letters. And this critique actually influenced William Morris in England, and this led to a widespread revival of Caslon, which had a lower contrast between thick and thin. And by the 20th century, many believed that Caslon had an almost magical powers of readability, as you can see from that quote from Daniel Berkeley Updike. Now, my second hero of readability is Matthew Lukash, whom nobody knows about practically, but in the late 30s, he separated readability, meaning reading comfort, from legibility, meaning the speed of recognition. And it's that reading comfort that I was really focused on. So readability, I think, involves several things: good writing, ease of for the eye and brain of decoding, and also good aesthetics. Now, good reading is complicated because it involves all of these things. Now, 2 things that are key in good readability are having good rhythm and color. And here's examples of bad rhythm and bad color. And what happens when you mess up rhythm and color is that you get noise and your eye doesn't decode the letters simply. One of the, I pushed the thing. I accidentally hit the pad. Can I go back? No? Yes, I can. Okay. Here. So good rhythm. One of the things is width. Here I've done an E that's too narrow, and on the bottom an E that's too wide, and in the middle is supposed to be just right. When you disturb the rhythm of how the type relates to each other, then you have problems. Second, you need good spacing. Many of you have done kerning, and you know that the area between the letters needs to look roughly equal. But it's also true that in the counter, that's inside the letters, that also needs to balance with the letter space. So those also one needs to attend to. Furthermore, to achieve even color, that's even density, you need to have roughly equal weights of the different parts. Here, if you look at the beak on the E on the top, it's too bold. If you compare it to the N in hen, and too light on the bottom. But you also want a dance of shapes. You don't want everything to be an even gray. It has to jump around. And here you'll see that taking my clue from Caslon, who I was reviving, you'll see that here on the eye, the top of the eye is actually much heavier than the top of the stem of the M, and yet they look approximately equal in weight. So you get a dance with even color. Now, another factor is the weight of the strokes. And for a long time, scribes realized that there was an ideal weight, which you can see here, measured by the nib width of the pen. Now, the thing is, with all of these things required, you'd think that all text faces have to look alike. But in fact, they can vary. For example, here's Quadrat, and a demonstration that with Quadrat, which is heavy, it needs more vertical space. Here is Spectrum, which is a light typeface, and it requires, on the contrary, less vertical space in order to achieve that balance of good rhythm. So, in fact, there are different typefaces that are ideal for different purposes, like for newspapers or for books. So they vary. Now, another factor that's involved in readability is what I call a picket fence, which creates a dazzle to the eye. On the top is a Bodoni display, which you can see has some dazzle to it. And what I've done is to try to systematically avoid that dazzle. In my font here, you can see that the stems are actually narrowed in the middle, and the feet are made heavier, so that it looks at the same time dark and open, and avoids that dazzle of the picket fence. Because I wanted it welcoming, I also went for a soft but strong aesthetic. So I had soft outer corners but sharp, clean inner corners, and the caps are overweighted and straight, so that they're very strong, following like the imperial Roman model of the caps. So putting it all together, here you have a display from Font Bureau of Williams Caslon text, which I hope is very readable and welcoming for the things I write and the things other people write. Thank you.
I will also talk about revivals. Revivals are a difficult thing. I did not make many revivals yet because on one side you should be true to the historic model, and on the other side it should not be a copy of it. I show you 3 of my typefaces you could call revivals. To deal with the name problems, 2 things are very important. First, always start to draw from scratch, and never ever work on the outline of another type designer. It actually is much faster because you don't waste time working on altering an existing style. Second, find a good reason for the new version for your project, something that makes it your own. Long ago in the 80s, when I was in my apprenticeship to be a typesetter, the printing shop received the magazine upper and lowercase. I admired the letterings of Tony Despina ever since. Many years later, when I started with Mommy, upper and lowercase was the only model I referred to. I did not know anything about a Spencerian handwriting. I just wanted to make the style work as a font. The practical reason why I started Mommy was L'Officiel magazine in Paris. Boris Bencic, who is here today, was the art director, and he asked me to work on a high contrast italic typeface. Mommy was first used in that magazine. Not much later, Edward Lida, who I hope is here today also, asked me to draw some words in the Despina style for WMag. So I just typed them quickly in Mommy, and he couldn't believe it. Only then Eddie told me about Spencerian handwriting. For this headline, Eddie asked me to do some swirls. Following the W ornament headline, Tiffany here in New York asked me to develop some swirls, and they used them in their brochures. As a type designer, you live and think foam. For me, the history of a typeface is only important if it tells you something about the form, the proportions, and the visual system it follows. I don't really care about the weird habits of Eric Gill or Baskerville. Giovanni Francesco Cresci was one of the famous handwriting teachers of the Renaissance. He crossed my path when I was doing my degree project about the history of italic Renaissance type. This is the Roman, very elegant and clear for a Renaissance example. I was only interested in the lowercase. I ignored the uppercase and the italics Cresci did. The caps were more or less the Roman capitalis. At that time, the italic was independent from the Roman anyway. Only later in the Baroque, italic joined the family. I started with the display to keep the elegance, followed by the italic and then the text versions. The main task for a text typeface today is narrow columns, like in magazine or corporate use. That makes the proportions. Ascenders and descenders need to be short but not clumsy to work with little leading. The last product I want to show is fairly personal. It's about Rotis. Many people hate it, some admire it. Now I'm even living 3 miles down the stream from Rotis, where Otto lives. My project was to have a look into the visual system Rotis follows and discuss it in a visual way. One thing that was always criticized was the C and the E. They have an angled axis where the rest of the font has an upright one. So in my typeface I did versions where I played with these angles. An upright version, an angled or broad pen version, and a version with a mirrored angle that goes away from writing totally. And a mixed angled version you can see here in text. The smaller you get, the less it's disturbing. Yeah, it's true. So the consistency of the axis is not that important. But Rotis has a much bigger problem than the axis angles. It's the proportion. It's too narrow. This is to all the designers who think a condensed typeface saves space. In a narrow typeface, the characters lose the horizontal elements. But the horizontal elements make the character unique. Reduce them, and it looks like a garden fence. Layout, therefore, that's the typeface I designed, has proportions that serve in a much wider usage. Lego is, by the way, it's the bigger village next to Rotis. But basically, I much more enjoy to design typefaces that have no historic model. It is much more satisfying to have that I had the idea. A new typeface is my tribute to the times I live in. Type design is art. For many years, I did not make much money with type. Type design gave me a lot of freedom because there were no clients. Now type design fills most of my time. Half is clients' work and half is my own stuff. But for that part, I still want to keep my freedom to dig for something new. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about New Rail Alphabet, which I revived in between 2008 and 2009 in collaboration with its original designer, Margaret Calvert. The alphabet was designed in 1965 as a signing face to be used on all British railway signs. across the country. It was based at the time or inspired by Helvetica and Accidents Grotesque. Our job was to turn this original alphabet into a contemporary font for text, and adding quite a few weights to that. This slide shows, or gives us an overview of typefaces Margaret Calvert's been involved with, or she designed. And what we can see on the center axis is that British airports, all the hospitals and British Rail, they basically use the same typeface across the 60s. Here's some examples of signage. That's the hospital signage where the font is used. There should be some more slides coming up. Yeah, here's how it's applied on the station signage for all British Rail signs. What happened was Margaret Calvert, she taught me at the Royal College of Art between 1998 and 2000. In 2008, she called me up and asked me if I wanted to revive her font or turn her 1965 alphabet into a digital font that could be used in text. So this is what happened. These are some of the. This is from the original manual for the British airports. The signer system. You can see it's all made of tiles. And another slide. It was adapted or adopted by many countries as well as a signing face. So it's one font basically that's used across a range of sign systems. In the process, I would carefully digitize the original source material. Margaret works by hand. I work on screen. So we would have like monthly meetings closer to release date. It would be like every 2 weeks. Here's an example of one of the original pieces of artwork. You can see it's dated April 65. Show you on the next slide. I'll show you exactly what we've done. But back when it was designed, it was only for signs. There was no text face. So when text was used, Helvetica was specified. So our job in this case was to turn this large-scale typeface into one that would work in text, and the red outline shows the tweaks we've done. One thing during the design process was, quite early on, was to map out the weight range we wanted. And Margaret sketched with her pencil. She made a grade, and she also came up with the name saying she wanted to go from off-white to black, and that's basically what we've done with the weights. Because it has references to accidents and Helvetica, it was important for us throughout the whole process to compare and align and see where we were in that environment, and we see it still holds its own next to the two others. What's different from this, or what distinguishes it from the known from other known fonts, is that it's got a slightly larger X height. It's more uniform. It's squarer. The capital letters are less bold, so they match better with the lowercase. A quick overview of the new character set. So we went basically from 71 characters to 473 characters, supporting Eastern European languages. And here is the weight range, 6 weights, and we also designed an italic, which wasn't done originally. And so basically this is our first commercial typeface. We launched it in 2009, and it was kind of the font that showed us how to, or that there was actually a market for the digital type we do. I'm going to show you our latest project now, which is another collaboration with Margaret, and we're basically going back and reviving her transport alphabet from late 50s. It's called Transport, and we're doing the exact same thing. We're turning a signing face into a text face. We're matching the weights of New Rail alphabet, so we have 6 weights. All the stems in the lowercase are going to match all the stems in the New Rail. This is a slide showing one of the original maquettes. It's hand-painted acrylic, and is one of 16 housed. It's in the collection of St. Bride's in London. So this is some of the source material I have now. And here's a few more things. Original glass negatives. A very recent drawing by Margaret. She's reconnecting with her font from back then. Is one of the slides out of the box, and some other source material from publications around the time the font was issued. This is where we are at the moment. It'll be in 6 weights, and here are the first 3, the light, the medium, and the bold, and it's due out later this year. That's all.
All right. Last year I was contacted by Font Chapin at Fahrenheit 212 about doing a custom font for a project they were doing. This is a very special credit card where the recipient, the customer, gets a monogram personalized for them. This was the sketch that they originally gave me, where they had mapped out the basic alphabet, and the challenge for me was to design all of the monograms, the ligatures, for 2- and 3-letter combinations. So these were their tests at the bottom for what those might look like. One interesting detail is the capital I, which is 3 lines. The history of the monogram, it goes back to ancient Greece, the upper right, that's the phi rho mark. Then Albert Durer's signature, a range of monograms. Eat the mic. Sorry. Unfortunately, today, this is what most monograms look like. It's the kind of thing you get on, the corner of your shirt. Or then there's like the Louis Vuitton print. I actually really like the Kate Spade one in the middle there. That's a K and an S. Then there's like the Michael Kors thing. There are existing typefaces for monograms, but they're really they're not unlike any other typeface, where you're just setting the text, that the letters are next to each other is really incidental. They're not drawn to optimize as a singular mark. So what we did was to create marks individual to each one. We looked at avant-garde, especially the 45-degree angles were really helpful in locking things together. I think it's interesting in this example, none of the alternates were used on that letter set sheet. So one of the first things that was important was to figure out what the system was, the consistency of the spaces between the verticals, then what are the spaces between the diagonals, how do those things lock up together, and then using contextual alternates to optimize the shape of how these things combined, especially doing a round that had no overshoot so that it locked up perfectly with a straight character like the E. These are all of the different alternates that I did, and some of the contextual alternate code for, as I kerned it using metrics machine, figured out, the E needs to always lock up with the Q in this way. We figured out that the number of monograms would actually be very large. 26 cubed is 17,576 combinations. 26 squared is 676, adds up to over 18,000 combinations. To make things a little bit simpler, we settled on the solution that there would only be one mark for any given number of 3-letter combinations. So if there's two duplicate letters and one unique one, you have 3 combinations for 6. There's 6 combinations for any combination of 3 unique letters. In the proofing process, I had to generate text that had all 18,000 combinations of letters, and then using InDesign, I went through using color coding system, chose what I thought was the closest to the best solution, and then using find and replace, then whatever. It was a long process. This is what we ended up with, just a sample of the marks. I think it works fairly well, with varying degrees of success, that the letters are right on top of each other, so if your initials are KLM or LKM, you'd be reasonably happy that that's your mark. This was one of the last things I got from Fahrenheit before the project was canceled. So you can't really see, but this is the difference between embossed and debossed, these different patterns. It would have been really cool. It's like blue leather. So, in the end, I was left with this font with 4,000 monograms and no credit cards to put it on. But there will be a second life for it. Actually, Jesse Ragan, up next, recommended to me that I show it to House Industries for use with the photo lettering system. So one of the first things that I had to do was to fill out the character set, doing some accented characters, numbers, basic punctuation. But House had the great idea to really focus on the triplicate letters, that existed. If your initials were AAA, you would have letters like this. So I did that for all of the characters. It was necessary to redraw some things, like the asterisk. I took a couple of the pieces out. The at and the copyright, there's only one A. All of the accents, the accent itself only happens once. And then wouldn't it be really cool if each of those, of the three, were separated? They could be different colors with the photo lettering system. You can also control the alpha channel, create a multiply effect. For about a minute, I considered doing that for all of the monograms. But as you'll see in the next slide, I did lots of little cheats to optimize the drawing, on the right-hand side. That doesn't look so good when you actually layer all of those together. So, over 66 hours, if I even spent a minute on each one, was not a good use of time. I don't know if anyone will use the monograms. But it will be released through photo lettering. This is my little comp of what it will hopefully look like. If you're not familiar with it, it's a great system because you can set the color for each of the layers. You can turn features on and off. I feel like I'm selling it to you now, but you add it to your cart, download a PDF. Anyways, my hope really is that it will, in a second life, people will do something that surprises me with it, use it in unique ways, and maybe the monograms will get used. Maybe they won't, but hopefully it'll be fun. Thanks.
So when we were planning this talk, Ellen asked us for a question that we were answering and what our wicked problem would be. And I came up with this. Can a century of eclectic lettering that's already carved in stone, literally, reach new harmony through custom type? This is the question that was posed to me when Joe Marianek of Michael Beirut's team at Pentagram approached me for a project for the New York Public Library, the main branch, which is now known as the Schwartzman Building, shown here. This is when it was under construction in 1911. Astor Hall is the main entranceway that you come through when you enter the building. And included in the design of the building and the concept was that donor names would be carved on these columns throughout the entryway, throughout Astor Hall. And this has been continued since the building was built and then through to the present, to the 2000s. And my assignment was to create a new typeface that would be used to continue this tradition with an eye toward the history, but updating it slightly. So I guess the wicked problem really was to preserve the character and the history of this building, but to create something that unified this sort of diverse, eclectic collection of lettering that was in there, because over the course of a century, things had changed dramatically over time, and one line would be different from the line before it. So one of the first things that I did was to go into the building and actually take rubbings of the walls in this sort of frantic dash before the library opened one morning. And I wanted to sort of document the landscape that my work was going to be resting within. And I did get a little technical with this too, because it was important to know the weights of the existing letters, the sizes of the existing letters, and that changed over the course of the years as well. Yeah, okay. So from there, just trying to figure out where my typefaces would lie within this, this system. And there was a sort of a natural dividing point in the different kinds of names that were carved in the building. There are these benefactors and library guardians, the two categories. Benefactors go back to the beginning of the building. Library guardians is a newer category, I think, for the bigger spenders. I'm not exactly sure. And so looking at the oldest carvings for the benefactors, they have this sort of beautiful style and kind of quirky and sometimes a little awkward style, but interesting, with more of a nod to typographic tradition of the time, of the 19-teens, I think, more than looking at inscriptional letter forms. Those have kind of been replaced by these wonky templates that were used in the 2000s, which you can see here. These are actually vinyl templates which were applied to the walls and then stone carved by hand with a hammer and chisel through those templates. For the Guardian names, those were the same templates but at a slightly larger size. As you saw in the benefactor names, those got very small. The small caps are about an inch tall, so the stem weights get very light. And it's a low contrast surface where you have this gray wall with a gold letter form carved into it. So from there, and then these newer carvings, the Library Guardians, have this more sort of inscriptional quality. They speak more to maybe something relating to the 19th century or 20th century idea of Trajan's column. But then those benefactor titles on the left are a little more typographic, as I said. They speak to a different kind of tradition. So I wanted to take these four basic categories that I had identified, the titles on the top and the names on the bottom for the benefactors and Library Guardians, and create a system that worked together for these four styles. And there were a lot of weird things, particularly in the names typefaces, which you can see at the bottom there, where forms are a little awkward, the weights are a little bit off, and I wanted to create something that captured that spirit, but did something a little different. So on the left, you can see the benefactors names typeface at the bottom, where I've actually gone back to that first slide you saw of the names carved around 1910, which have a more interesting style to me and more robust. The stem weights are a lot heavier. The X height gets a little bit larger, or I guess the small cap height in this case. And then for the, and those relate in the benefactors' names to that display title, which said benefactors at the top. And then for the Guardians' names, I sort of dispensed with what had been used for that and referred more to the words Library Guardians that had been carved in the display setting. So taking all this and working it into a more cohesive system, here you can see the benefactors' titling in red and the benefactors' names in black, how those work together. They're related and similar in aesthetic, but a little bit different. Again, really trying to return to what had come before, trying to really speak to the history of the building, but doing something that didn't stand out from what had been carved before. Here we have the Guardians' names, which again is a different category, a very different aesthetic, but since they're both drawn by my hands, I think they have some resonance with each other as well. This is a little bit lighter. The small cap height is a little bit smaller and lighter because this is used for larger sizes. So all these were intended for very specific settings and specific sizes in the building. Here you can see those two in comparison with each other, how those relate. From there, move on to my next slide. There are ultimately those four styles of the display and then the names faces. Here you can see a little bit of the character set as well. I included alternates for every style, but particularly with the names faces, I wanted to give the opportunity for the designer to play around a little bit with different forms, because in this eclectic style of the historical carvings, one line would have a serif on the top of the A and the next line would not. So this gives the designer the opportunity to play around with those. Some of the forms by default, like you can see the two J's there, are different forms. Those present a sort of automatic irregularity to the carvings as they're made. So now these have been carved into stone in the building, and they'll hopefully will be continued to be carved over the years in this same style. So it's gone from analog to digital and then back to analog again. It's a different kind of application than a digital typeface usually gets to be carved by hand with a chisel. My hope is that if this is successful, it preserves the character of the building and it speaks to that history. And it'll be an asset that the library can use moving forward that for carvings or for other uses that really is intrinsic to the nature of Astor Hall and the New York Public Library. Thanks.
So, yeah, who wants to be brave and climb over 50 people? I can also repeat your question if you are landlocked and would like to ask a question. We'd really love to hear from you all. Okay, then I'll ask a question. I have a question for Jesse. Is that font also used for print material? Or is it only going to be carved? And is that wrong?
It's intended just for the walls right now. I hope that they will take advantage of that because it does really, it seems sort of intrinsic to the fiber of that institution. So hopefully in the future.
But do you feel like that's like a violation of the idea? I mean, font guys are really weird, right? Like,
For it to be
I mean, this stuff is so subtle that you guys are talking about. And so when I think of, well, if you made it to carve.
Well, I think, I mean, anytime you design a typeface, unless you're the one using it, you're sending out in the world and you just have to be at peace with what someone else is going to do with it. So, you know, you're creating a tool, and, you know, someone else who creates a different kind of tool, people are going to take that home and use it however they will. So I think that's something that we have to come to terms with as a designer, as a typeface designer.
I've never heard such a relaxed type designer. Yeah, so I see a question here.
I'm kind of landlocked. So
Yeah, go ahead. We'll help you out.
So actually to you,
Yeah.
and also to them, is so the kinds of exercises, or I'm curious as to how the semester, the program evolves in terms of, are there real world projects that they have to do? Because they all talked about real world situations, so I'm curious if that's part of what the homework assignments are.
This is a good question for Jesse. The question is whether there are real-world projects given in the Type at Cooper program.
Just to clarify, in case I misunderstood, we're not the students of the program.
No, Jesse being the instructor
Henrik
of the...
is one of the students for the extended program, and I'm one of the teachers. I mean, Henrik is in the condensed program as a student. I'm one of the teachers for the extended program, the year-long version. But I would say not exactly. We're not really focused on real-world assignments so much. In my class, it's more about having the students create something that they create something that's a historical revival, and then they create something which is an original typeface from scratch, which I think as a student, the most important thing when you're embarking on a very long project like a typeface design is to have something you're really passionate about and excited about. So that's really what I emphasize, is for them to find something they're excited about doing for 30 weeks of class.
Well, they did. Some of them, if you've seen some, like our Flickr page where there's images, you'll see that some of them seem to really have a sense of what it might be used for, like for like
Definitely
Berkson.
people look at practical application of
Yeah.
this could be a typeface for magazine use or
Right.
that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
that's helpful as a typeface designer to have a goal in mind for how to use it.
So anybody else want to jump in? Yeah, thank you.
I'm a vision researcher, I'm a student doing a project, but I think will show that readability of small type depends only on center-to-center spaces, none of the other otherwise important things about type design. Can anyone speak to that?
Okay, so I think there's a question for William, and I'm going to just rephrase it, that we have a theory here, always good to hear a new theory, that readability really is only about center-to-center spacing, forget the rest. Is that right?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Readability, like everything else in type, is highly debatable.
It's a myth, a total myth.
Matthew Lukash, whose picture I showed, in the late 30s, showed that less readable type caused the blink rate to increase. And he was able to show that for example, boldness, the medium weights were more readable than bolder or lighter weights, which is contrary to what your hypothesis is. Now, his work, unfortunately, was forgotten. I've written about it, and I'm writing about it. A longer article will come out in typography papers in England. But I do not think your hypothesis is correct, but I cannot prove it, and it's all open to debate. I went with what my eyes told me when I designed my font, you know, but I would look forward to scientific work being done. I think a lot of work could be done, and I think Lucas's is the way to go.
All right, good. That's a great question.
Does that mean that would that mean that like the lowercase I and the lowercase w would be the same distance apart as like two e's? Is that what center to center means? Whoa. Okay.
Good. Very strange universe. Yeah. Okay, so who else has a theory? This is the only place in town where people will be interested. Yes, over here.
Just talking about theories and
Wait, can you speak a little louder, please?
What I want to say is that we obviously read differently nowadays from like texting and screen and like short sentence and burst of messages.
Right.
Our reading experience has changed. My question is, how does that affect the legibility and theories concerning readability and those issues?
Okay, so I'm not sure who can answer this, but the question is, how does our reliance on screen-based reading affect all these harebrained theories of legibility and readability?
Not only screen, but just like the nature of how information is delivered to us.
The same visual stimulus can't matter.
All right, well, one of you guys, jump in here because these are the world-changing questions of our time, okay? Anyone want to give it a shot?
Well, just briefly, people are trying to figure this out, the scientific researchers, but the state of it is not very clear. But I would say I think the eye and the brain, there's still certain limitations, so that's the same. The screen, because of its low resolution, has all kinds of challenges, and there's no doubt that these are met differently than for high resolution print. But this is a whole subject in itself that would be, I'm sure, several sessions, so I'll leave it there.
At least 40 seconds long. Okay, what else?
Is
These
this
are
on?
awesome. Yes, go ahead. Yeah?
Okay, I'm trying to text my daughter because she's a neuroscientist. There was something I ran across, so I looked smart, and she answered me. She's at NYU now, and I think 13 years. They study the brain. They just recently, and I saw it the other day, looked at the brain with MRIs to see, I don't know the right language to describe it, to see which typefaces have a greater legibility in the brain. They see it in the brain now, but these students, $150 they get, they look at the brain while they're reading something. And the answers are there. Scientifically proven.
Okay, so here we've heard it. Inside your brain is fonts. They're there. Yeah.
So we'll get them over here next.
So that is a private school, so it's not taxpayer dollars, right? Okay, no, that's really exciting. So inside your brain, the fonts are there.
Isn't it really noisy? Isn't it really noisy in an MRI though?
I still don't believe that there are answers, because when I look back when I learned to do typesetting, you had to read. It's what do you say? It's on. It's turned around, and
backwards, flipped.
Mirrored, in this gray, no contrast thing you have, and at the end you could read it as fast as normal text.
I know, so no matter how bad the fonts are, you can still read them.
No. It's just it's all about learning, and it's about getting used to something, and I think the brain is very open to learn about things.
Yeah, that's.
Well, Well, it's also complicated because is it the most legible font because it's what we've seen the most? It's not that it's intrinsically that the forms are easier to read. It's also that we've seen Helvetica our whole lives.
Yeah, okay. Anybody have a problem with Helvetica? I see someone in the back, yes. That's okay.
I guess sort of unrelated to the whole legibility debate, I've noticed that maybe like the past decade or so, there's a lot of excitement about typography that is a revival inspired by things outside of typography. Like you said, Gotham and Noise looking back at architectural forms, still reviving old like sign painters, things from outside of the world of printing. And I guess the question is, do you feel like that's sort of a way of the future, or going to continue to go deeper and deeper into what people who weren't professional, press workers were doing? Or do you think it's sort of going to be like the fad in 2000s, like the big grunge fonts in the 90s, the guys like, oh, that's when everyone was trying to make themselves a sign painter and all. And I guess, how do you see that trend continue?
Well, maybe Henrik would like to answer this question, which is about the fact that right now a lot of typefaces are based on non-typographic sources, like sign painting. I mean, Jeremy's done one too. Or is that just a trend, or is this forever?
What to look at, if I understand it right, if there's a trend in reviving type, is that your question?
Well, if you're reviving type from outside of books, printing presses, but from architectural signage or from hand-painted type.
I don't know. I mean, the work I do in collaboration with many people. And what I showed was with Margaret Calvert. She came from an analog era, and she now lives in a digital era. So there's a need for her to update or take her fonts into a digital kind of a system, so it's got life beyond what it was created for. So, I mean, personally, I'm inspired by everything, and that's building signs, engravings, books, you name it. I'll do it. It doesn't really. I don't. Trends are there, but probably when you see them, that's when they're over. So I'm not concerned about that.
You know, Hubert, a lot of your work is also based in calligraphy and non-typographic sources. And it does seem to be a big thing in typography right now.
I mean, it has to tell a story. It has to be. It has to touch people. So it's good if you have something that's made by hand as a basis, than to just start on a digital on the computer. So it's often very good to hand draw or take something that looks old. So it's more interesting. It touches people more. And if we live in a digital world, like you see on all those apps on the iPhone, they all try to bring in like this paper that looks like paper. So people seem to make the whole thing more analog, or try to make it more analog. So I think that's the reason why that happens.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What else do you have for us? Yes.
Yeah, I'm feeding off of the question from back there. You know, I think what he really meant was like, what does it mean to have an artist's vision in typography, with the typefaces?
Can you speak up?
What does it mean to have an artist's vision in the typeface, the mechanical typefaces that we make? What does that mean?
Okay, so the question is, what does it mean to have an artist's vision in a mechanical typeface? How about you? I'm looking at Philippe, because Philippe is
well, first of all, I would like to tell that I was touched to see one of this letter set, paper, and it looks like so from the old time. Today, because of the new technology, we're more able, to play with the shape tab. It was like a liberation for most of the graphic designer to have access to typography in a more freer way. And at that point, I think we're very close to the work of an artist. I mean, the way the artists behave with color or with brushes. Computer became a very sophisticated pencil, and you can do so much with it. So, in my opinion, that's the way I work. I'm not like a traditional typographer. I'm more like a graphic designer. Use typography and play with new shapes to go for experimental type. That's what I like, and I think there's a huge range of possibilities that brings technology and computer, that you can have a vision of how the type will evolve in some way that we cannot even imagine today. It can go very far, and that's where I'm interested to be. It's also, as you say, to bring emotion to it, you know, to go beyond just the technical and the mechanical aspect of typography. You can go much further, much beyond that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, but I would say that, like in William's work and in Henrik's work, you're trying to create typefaces that don't have emotion, right? That are,
well,
that kind of resist all that.
No.
Oh dear.
I don't think there's really such a thing as a neutral typeface. So I think it always has an aesthetic. But I think there's a huge range in type between type that's very expressive and stylized, you know, such as Mommy, you know, or the work you showed. It's very expressive, very on the artistic end. And I think there's others like mine and the work you've been doing, which is much more craft focused. In other words, really getting it to be functional for a certain purpose. So I think it spans the range, but what I'd like to say is that even in the most craft-oriented things, there is an aesthetic that comes through, and the artistic judgment is in how the whole thing fits together. It's not in one letter. It's in the look of the whole, which is 1,000 little decisions, which I'm, you know, sure you'll confirm, yes. Anyway, it's both. There's both in. That's what's actually fascinating about type, is that it's both art and craft.
I think everything is emotional. Even the constructed craft thing, it's all about emotion. So.
Yeah, does anyone want to argue against emotion? Yes, someone that. No, go ahead. Tell us what.
I have a question for Jeremy with the monogram project. You said they came to that initial thing that looks a lot like avant-garde. Did you ever kind of propose some kind of shift away from something that was so kind of avant-garde-y?
So the question is, did Jeremy ever consider a less avant-garde source for his monogram font?
Honestly, no. I thought it was a pretty successful solution to the problem. It especially worked well with the patterns that they had created. You know, this very simple geometry. I don't know how well you could see on the screen, but everything was slightly rounded. They didn't have sharp ends on the at the terminals. I really thought it was the right solution. You know, for creating a system for monograms based on the simple geometry, having those 45-degree angles, the perfect circle. Anything else would be a lot more complicated for getting the letters to combine. So I really didn't question it in that way. And I started with, you know, what they gave me, but then there was, you know, lots of optical corrections to make, and, you know, as I went through it, you know, the H needed to be narrower, or, you know, things like that. So it was a starting point, but it continued from there.
Yeah, there's a couple people in the back, in the pink sweater. That's a great question. So the question is about updating typefaces. What makes a typeface old, and what makes it new? And maybe this is good for William and Henrik, since you have such very detailed revivals.
Well, in the case I was concerned about, it was technology. The typeface was. It was interesting because the Braille alphabet we revived, and now transport alphabet we're working on at the moment. They don't. Well, Braille alphabet didn't exist in a digital format, and it was from 1965. The design was still alive, So it was very interesting to actually get that typeface and bring it up now. So, and there's a huge audience for it. So, I mean, what was the question again?
Well, I think that the question is what makes something new or old, and
Well,
it's
technology,
not.
that's
Yeah,
what.
yeah. But I don't think that's enough. I don't think just saying, "Oh, now it's digital, so it's new," isn't there? And I think with Williams Caslon, there's a whole remaking of something to make it work for our current moment.
Right. I was very conscious of this question, actually, that you've asked. And I didn't want to have a, quote, authentic revival. In other words, there are features of Caslon that I really admired. Particularly, I thought it had some kind of magic readability, which is an old idea that I partly bought. And what I was looking for is that, but I wanted it to look classic rather than antique. So classic in my head is something that sort of is not going to sway with the winds of time and has a comfort and a solidity about it. So yes, I definitely wanted to update it. In Caslon, there are like 5 good Caslons. So I wanted to do something different. And anyway, I could go on. You can go to ilovetypography.com and you'll see where I go on. I won't go on more about it here.
I saw that Jean-Francois had his hand up. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Ans. Black? What about a black version of your typeface, Jeremy?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can also select black as the color for the typeface for all 3 layers if you choose.
Thank God.
The new black.
Okay, that was easy. Who else?
I think you meant black. Black.
Oh, like heavier? Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you mean
That?
bold, extra
Oh,
bold?
man. Whoa. I don't have enough time for it. I mean, those overlapping forms in the monograms, I don't think it could get much heavier.
Anyone else have a question? Yeah. Right there, yes.
Yep.
Reviving or redoing typefaces is a wonderful exercise. And I just wonder, why would a public library change a typeface, which is so classic as a ranger, which is perfectly proportioned, and in the country, why would they want to change it? If their building hasn't changed, if they haven't modernized anything, what would be the justification?
Is that a rhetorical question? So the question is, why would a library change a typeface from something that's basically a Trajan, sort of classic Roman, to something else?
I think in this case, the situation was that they had sort of gone astray, and the inscriptions had sort of lost some of the historical quality. So in this case, it was more about going back to the history and really the legacy of this building, rather than just slapping on something like Adobe Trajan or some typeface that is already ubiquitous. This one is very much owned by that library and has their spirit and their character in it. So I think it's, in a way, maybe it's sort of the opposite of what you're saying. But
Do you mean they didn't have Trajan to begin with?
They didn't.
Is that what you're saying?
No, they didn't.
They didn't
no,
really.
it wasn't. They weren't using Trajan really. They were. I mean, the older stuff was sort of its own thing, and then I don't know where the letter forms came from for the 2000s.
Okay. So over here.
So what would you tell a teenage art student to help them embrace the love of type as opposed to these horrible monograms that they are surrounded with?
So, what would you tell a teenage art student who wants to embrace type? How do you get them away from the garbage? Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
I started, my way into lettering was by way of painting graffiti. So I don't know how that works. But I still paint.
That's
Is
not-
lettering large scale?
That's the wrong answer.
I
Someone
think
else.
it's actually true. If you try to do it yourself, then you discover how challenging and how interesting it is.
What do you mean, graffiti?
No, anything, any letter, any letter.
Any letter, yeah.
How about reading books? Okay, so we're going to take one more question, I think, and then if people want to come and regale the esoteric panel with even more narrowly focused questions, that would be terrific. So who wants to be the final? I see someone way in the back. So I think the question is, what about fonts where there's a sans and a serif, like Scala and Scala sans, or when the thing is happening actually in the same letter form, like in dead history? You got that? What?
I was just kind of wondering about your thoughts about, the process of designing something that's kind of supposed to be used together as a serif and the same serif.
Well, like there's a slab version of one of your Henrik. I think I had to wake him up.
I don't remember. I mean, if you, I don't know.
Like, do you think it's wrong? Was that the question?
If I had a lot of time, I would do matching sans for all my serifs and the other way around. I mean, I actually think contrast in typography is interesting, so I don't mind if you use two different fonts. They can be from the same foundry, but if it's a sans mixed with a serif, I'm kind of classical in that way, so I've got even two different styles as well, not necessarily coming from the same structure. I like Scala and Scala sans.
Go ahead. Take it away.
I mean, Rotus was the first that you call a hybrid typeface. And I think it was a fashion in a way, because I don't think that a lot of graphic designers want that. Because mixing is much more interesting if you mix a nice serif with a sans serif. And yeah, I think it's much more creative to find the right combination.
I think the idea of having one font that does it all is something that larger corporations buy into. It gives them some kind of security and something to if they can explain that to themselves, their employees and their audience as well. There's actually one font. I think that market, that's probably where it finds its key. Key audience, but like Jocham,
Yeah.
like.
I think it's actually a problem when you have something like Helvetica. You couldn't make a classic serif out of it. So
Easy.
Easy.
How about Caslon sans? 2 words, Caslon sans.
Oh, what?
Do you have any plans for Caslon sans?
Well, no, it wouldn't be Caslon sans.
I think he was so
have
appalled
thought
he
about
couldn't
something
even hear.
that would match it, but it would be completely different, because the demands of a sans are so different. Because it's not only the serifs, it's also how high or low the contrast is. So you can try to sort of match the spirit a little bit. I mean, I hesitate to talk about this because it's an endless debate. Because you can. I mean, some people succeed. Scala and Scala sans are both great.
Quadrat.
Yeah, Quadrat. Those are great typefaces. A lot of people as you said, don't like to use them together. So it's really up to the creativity of the graphic designer what they like to do. And I don't think in that case, on readability, I think there are answers. We don't know them for sure, but on these, I think there are really no answers. It's up to the creativity of the designer. And how they
I
use
love
it.
these typeface designers that actually like graphic design.
Oh, I think
awesome.
everybody loves graphic designers, right?
Yes. Okay. All right. Well,
I just want to ask, how many people knew what Jeremy was talking about when he said metrics machine? How many hands? Yeah.
oh my God.
That's pretty good.
That's
all right.
Tal Lemming's
Okay.
excellent kerning program.
How many people
Type
know what
supply.
kerning is? Everybody knows what kerning is? Okay, good. Yeah, great.
Okay, so we're going to call it quits, and everybody go home and make some fonts.